Hello. Thank you for joining me today. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and leave me a comment if you enjoy my videos. Welcome to Nomad's Land Studios. Narrations by Rebecca. Cinderella, or The Little Glass Slipper, by Charles Perrault. Once there was a gentleman who married for his second wife the proudest and most haughty woman that was ever seen. She had, by a former husband, 2 daughters of her own, who were, indeed, exactly like her in all things. He had likewise, by another wife, a young daughter, but of unparalleled goodness and sweetness of temper, which she took from her mother, who was the best creature in the world. No sooner were the ceremonies of the wedding over, but the stepmother began to show herself in her true colors. She could not bear the good qualities of this pretty girl, and the less because they made her own daughters appear the more odious. She employed in her the meanest work of the house. She scoured the dishes, tables, etc., and cleaned Madame's chamber, and those of the misses, her daughters. She slept in a sorry garret, on a wretched straw bed, while her sisters slept in fine rooms, with floors all inlaid, on beds of the very newest fashion, and where they had looking-glasses so large that they could see themselves at their full length from head to foot. The poor girl bore it all patiently, and dared not tell her father, who would have scolded her, for his wife governed him entirely. When she had done her work, she used to go to the chimney corner, and sit down there in the cinders and ashes, which caused her to be called Cinder Wench. Only the younger sister, who was not so rude and uncivil as the older one, called her Cinderella. However, Cinderella, notwithstanding her coarse apparel, was 100 times more beautiful than her sisters, although they were always dressed very richly. It happened that the king's son gave a ball, and invited all persons of fashion to it. Our young misses were also invited, for they cut a very grand figure among those of quality. They were mightily delighted at this invitation, and wonderfully busy in selecting the gowns, petticoats, and hairdressing that would best become them. This was a new difficulty for Cinderella, for it was she who ironed her sisters' linen and pleated their ruffles. They talked all day long of nothing but how they should be dressed. "For my part," said the eldest, "I will wear my red velvet suit with French trimming." "And I," said the youngest, "shall have my usual petticoat. But then, to make amends for that, I will put on my gold-flowered cloak and my diamond stomacher, which is far from being the most ordinary one in the world." They sent for the best hairdresser they could get to make up their headpieces and adjust their hairdos, and they had their red brushes and patches from Mademoiselle de la Poche. They also consulted Cinderella in all these matters, for she had excellent ideas, and her advice was always good. Indeed, she even offered her services to fix their hair, which they very willingly accepted. As she was doing this, they said to her, "Cinderella, would you not like to go to the ball?" "Alas," said she, "you only jeer me. It is not for such as I am to go to such a place." "You are quite right," they replied. "It would make the people laugh to see a cinder wench at a ball." Anyone but Cinderella would have fixed their hair awry, but she was very good, and dressed them perfectly well. They were so excited that they hadn't eaten a thing for almost 2 days. Then they broke more than a dozen laces trying to have themselves laced up tightly enough to give them a fine, slender shape. They were continually in front of their looking-glass. At last the happy day came. They went to court, and Cinderella followed them with her eyes as long as she could. When she lost sight of them, she started to cry. Her godmother, who saw her all in tears, asked her what was the matter. "I wish I could. I wish I could." She was not able to speak the rest, being interrupted by her tears and sobbing. This godmother of hers, who was a fairy, said to her, "You wish that you could go to the ball, is it not so?" "Yes," cried Cinderella with a great sigh. "Well," said her godmother, "be but a good girl, and I will contrive that you shall go." Then she took her into her chamber and said to her, "Run into the garden and bring me a pumpkin." Cinderella went immediately to gather the finest she could get and brought it to her godmother, not being able to imagine how this pumpkin could help her go to the ball. Her godmother scooped out all the inside of it, leaving nothing but the rind. Having done this, she struck the pumpkin with her wand, and it was instantly turned into a fine coach, gilded all over with gold. She then went to look into her mouse-trap, where she found 6 mice, all alive, and ordered Cinderella to lift up a little the trap-door. She gave each mouse as it went out a little tap with her wand, and the mouse was that moment turned into a fine horse, which altogether made a very fine set of 6 horses, of a beautiful mouse-colored dapple gray. Being at a loss for a coachman, Cinderella said, "I will go and see if there is not a rat in the trap that we can turn into a coachman." "You are right," replied her godmother. "Go and look." Cinderella brought the trap to her, and in it there were 3 huge rats. The fairy chose the one which had the largest beard, touched him with her wand, and turned him into a fat, jolly coachman, who had the smartest whiskers that eyes ever beheld. After that she said to her, "Go again into the garden, and you will find 6 lizards behind the watering pot. Bring them to me." She had no sooner done so, but her godmother turned them into 6 footmen, who skipped up immediately behind the coach, with their liveries all bedaubed with gold and silver, and clung as close behind each other as if they had done nothing else their whole lives. The fairy then said to Cinderella, "Well, you see here an equipage fit to go to the ball with. Are you not pleased with it?" "Oh, yes," she cried. "But must I go in these nasty rags?" Her godmother then touched her with her wand, and at the same instant her clothes turned into cloth of gold and silver, all beset with jewels. This done, she gave her a pair of glass slippers, the prettiest in the whole world. Being thus decked out, she got up into her coach, but her godmother, above all things, commanded her not to stay past midnight, telling her at the same time that if she stayed 1 moment longer, the coach would be a pumpkin again, her horses mice, her coachman a rat, her footmen lizards, and that her clothes would become just as they were before. She promised her godmother to leave the ball before midnight, and then drove away, scarcely able to contain herself for joy. The king's son, who was told that a great princess, whom nobody knew, had arrived, ran out to receive her. He gave her his hand as she alighted from the coach, and led her into the hall among all the company. There was immediately a profound silence. Everyone stopped dancing, and the violins ceased to play. So entranced was everyone with the singular beauties of the unknown newcomer. Nothing was then heard but a confused noise of, "How beautiful she is! How beautiful she is!" The king himself, old as he was, could not help watching her, and telling the queen softly that it was a long time since he had seen so beautiful and lovely a creature. All the ladies were busied in considering her clothes and headdress, hoping to have some made next day after the same pattern, provided they could find such fine materials and as able hands to make them. The king's son led her to the most honorable seat, and afterwards took her out to dance with him. She danced so very gracefully that they all more and more admired her. A fine meal was served up, but the young prince ate not a morsel, so intently was he busied in gazing on her. She went and sat down by her sisters, showing them 1,000 civilities, giving them part of the oranges and citrons which the prince had presented her with, which very much surprised them, for they did not know her. While Cinderella was thus amusing her sisters, she heard the clock strike 11 3/4, whereupon she immediately made a curtsy to the company and hurried away as fast as she could. Arriving home, she ran to seek out her godmother, and, after having thanked her, she said she could not but heartily wish she might go to the ball the next day as well, because the king's son had invited her. As she was eagerly telling her godmother everything that had happened at the ball, her 2 sisters knocked at the door, which Cinderella ran and opened. "You stayed such a long time," she cried, gaping, rubbing her eyes and stretching herself as if she had been sleeping. She had not, however, had any manner of inclination to sleep while they were away from home. "If you had been at the ball," said one of her sisters, "you would not have been tired with it. The finest princess was there, the most beautiful that mortal eyes have ever seen. She showed us 1,000 civilities, and gave us oranges and citron." Cinderella seemed very indifferent in the matter. Indeed, she asked them the name of that princess, but they told her they did not know it, and that the king's son was very uneasy on her account, and would give all the world to know who she was. At this Cinderella, smiling, replied, "She must then be very beautiful indeed. How happy you have been! Could not I see her? Ah, dear Charlotte, do lend me your yellow dress, which you wear every day." "Yes, to be sure," cried Charlotte. "Lend my clothes to such a dirty cinder wench as you are. I should be such a fool." Cinderella, indeed, well expected such an answer, and was very glad of the refusal, for she would have been sadly put to it if her sister had lent her what she asked for jestingly. The next day the two sisters were at the ball, and so was Cinderella, but dressed even more magnificently than before. The king's son was always by her, and never ceased his compliments and kind speeches to her. All this was so far from being tiresome to her, and indeed she quite forgot what her godmother had told her. She thought that it was no later than 11 when she counted the clock striking 12. She jumped up and fled, as nimble as a deer. The prince followed, but could not overtake her. She left behind one of her glass slippers, which the prince picked up most carefully. She reached home, but quite out of breath, and in her nasty old clothes, having nothing left of all her finery, but one of the little slippers, the mate to the one that she had dropped. The guards at the palace gate were asked if they had not seen a princess go out. They replied that they had seen nobody leave but a young girl, very shabbily dressed, and who had more the air of a poor country wench than a gentlewoman. When the sisters returned from the ball, Cinderella asked them if they had been well entertained, and if the fine lady had been there. They told her yes, but that she hurried away immediately when it struck 12, and with so much haste that she dropped one of her little glass slippers, the prettiest in the world, which the king's son had picked up, that he had done nothing but look at her all the time at the ball, and that most certainly he was very much in love with the beautiful person who owned the glass slipper. What they said was very true, for a few days later the king's son had it proclaimed, by sound of trumpet, that he would marry her whose foot this slipper would just fit. They began to try it on the princesses, then the duchesses, and all the court, but in vain. It was brought to the two sisters, who did all they possibly could to force their foot into the slipper, but they did not succeed. Cinderella, who saw all this and knew that it was her slipper, said to them, laughing, "Let me see if it will not fit me." The sisters burst out laughing and began to banter with her. The gentleman who was sent to try the slipper looked earnestly at Cinderella, and, finding her very handsome, said that it was only just that she should try as well, and that he had orders to let everyone try. He had Cinderella sit down, and putting the slipper to her foot, he found that it went on very easily, fitting her as if it had been made of wax. Her two sisters were greatly astonished, but then even more so, when Cinderella pulled out of her pocket the other slipper, and put it on her other foot. Then in came her godmother, and touched her wand to Cinderella's clothes, making them richer and more magnificent than any of those she had worn before. And now her two sisters found her to be that fine, beautiful lady whom they had seen at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet to beg pardon for all the ill treatment they had made her undergo. Cinderella took them up, and as she embraced them, said that she forgave them with all her heart, and wanted them to always love her. She was taken to the young prince, dressed as she was. He thought she was more charming than before, and a few days after married her. Cinderella, who was no less good than beautiful, gave her two sisters lodgings in the palace, and that very same day matched them with two great lords of the court. Moral: beauty in a woman is a rare treasure that will always be admired. Graciousness, however, is priceless, and of even greater value. This is what Cinderella's godmother gave to her when she taught her to behave like a queen. Young women, in the winning of a heart, graciousness is more important than a beautiful hairdo. It is a true gift of the fairies. Without it, nothing is possible. With it, one can do anything. Another moral. Without doubt, it is a great advantage to have intelligence, courage, good breeding, and common sense. These and similar talents come only from heaven, and it is good to have them. However, even these may fail to bring you success without the blessing of a godfather or a godmother. The narrative poem, Goblin Market, by Christina Rossetti. Morning and evening, maids heard the goblins cry, "Come buy our orchard fruits, come buy, come buy. Apples and quinces, lemons and oranges, plump unpicked cherries, melons and raspberries, bloom down-cheeked peaches, swart-headed mulberries, wild free-born cranberries, crabapples, dewberries, pineapples, blackberries, apricots, strawberries, all ripe together in the summer weather. Morns that pass by, fair eves that fly. Come buy, our grapes fresh from the vine. Pomegranates full and fine, dates and sharp bullaces, rare pears and greengages, damsons and bilberries. Taste them and try, currants and gooseberries, bright fire-like barberries, figs to fill your mouth, citrons from the south, sweet to tongue and sound to eye. Come buy, come buy. Evening by evening, among the brookside rushes, Laura bowed her head to hear. Lizzie veiled her blushes. Crouching close together, in the cooling weather, with clasping arms and cautioning lips, with tingling cheeks and fingertips. "Lie close," Laura said, pricking up her golden head. "We must not look at goblin men. We must not buy their fruits. Who knows upon what soil they fed their hungry, thirsty roots?" "Come buy," called the goblins, hobbling down the glen. "Oh," cried Lizzie, "Laura, Laura, you should not peep at goblin men." Lizzie covered up her eyes, covered close lest they should look. Laura reared her glossy head and whispered like the restless brook, "Look, Lizzie, down the glen tramp little men. One holds a basket, one bears a plate, one lugs a golden dish of many pounds weight. How fair the vine must grow, whose grapes are so luscious. How warm the wind must blow through those fruit bushes." "No," said Lizzie, "no, no, no. Their offers should not charm us. Their evil gifts would harm us." She thrust a dimpled finger in each ear, shut eyes and ran. Curious Laura chose to linger, wondering at each merchant man. One had a cat's face, one whisked a tail, one tramped at a rat's pace, one crawled like a snail. One like a wombat prowled obtuse and furry, one like a radle tumbled hurry-scurry. She heard a voice like voice of doves, cooing all together. They sounded kind and full of loves in the pleasant weather. Laura stretched her gleaming neck, like a rush-embedded swan, like a lily from the beck, like a moonlit poplar branch, like a vessel at the launch, when its last restraint is gone. Backwards up the mossy glen turned and trooped the goblin men, with their shrill repeated cry, "Come buy, come buy." When they reached where Laura was, they stood stock still upon the moss, leering at each other, brother with queer brother, signaling each other, brother with sly brother. One set his basket down, one reared his plate, one began to weave a crown of tendrils, leaves, and rough nuts brown. Men saw not such in any town. One heaved the golden weight of dish and fruit to offer her. "Come buy, come buy," was still their cry. Laura stared but did not stir, longed but had no money. The whisk-tailed merchant bade her taste, in tones as smooth as honey. The cat-face purred, the rat-paste spoke a word of welcome, and the snail-paste even was heard. One parrot-voiced and jolly cried, "Pretty Goblin," still for "Pretty Polly." One whistled like a bird, but sweet-toothed Laura spoke in haste. "Good folk, I have no coin to take or to purloin. I have no copper in my purse, I have no silver either, and all my gold is on the furze that shakes in windy weather above the resty heather."
"You have much gold upon your head,"
they answered all together.
"Buy from us with a golden curl."
She clipped a precious golden lock, she dropped a tear more rare than pearl, then sucked their fruit globes fair or red, sweeter than honey from the rock, stronger than man-rejoicing wine, clearer than water flowed that juice. She never tasted such before. How should it cloy with length of use? She sucked and sucked and sucked the more, fruits which that unknown orchard bore. She sucked until her lips were sore, then flung the emptied rinds away, but gathered up one kernel stone, and knew not was it night or day, as she turned home alone. Lizzie met her at the gate, full of wise upbraidings. "Dear, you should not stay so late. Twilight is not good for maidens. Should not loiter in the glen, in the haunts of goblin men. Do you not remember Jeannie, how she met them in the moonlight, took their gifts both choice and many, ate their fruits and wore their flowers, plucked from bowers where summer ripens at all hours? But ever in the moonlight she pined and pined away, sought them by night and day, found them no more, but dwindled and grew grey, then fell with the first snow, while to this day no grass will grow where she lies low. I planted daisies there a year ago, that never blow. You should not loiter so." "Nay, hush," said Laura. "Nay, hush, my sister. I ate and ate my fill, yet my mouth waters still. Tomorrow night I will buy more," and kissed her. "Have done with sorrow. I'll bring you plums tomorrow, fresh on their mother's twigs, cherries worth getting. You cannot think what figs my teeth have met in, what melons icy cold piled on a dish of gold, too huge for me to hold, what peaches with a velvet nap, pellucid grapes without one seed. Odorous indeed must be the mead whereon they grow, and pure the wave they drink, with lilies at the brink, and sugar-sweet their sap. Golden head by golden head, like two pigeons in one nest, folded in each other's wings, they lay down in their curtained bed, like two blossoms on one stem, like two flakes of new-fallen snow, like two wands of ivory, tipped with gold for awful kings. Moon and stars gazed in at them, wind sang to them lullaby, lumbering owls forbore to fly. Not a bat flapped to and fro round their rest, cheek to cheek and breast to breast, locked together in one nest. Early in the morning, when the first cock crowed his warning, neat like bees, as sweet and busy, Laura rose with Lizzie, fetched in honey, milked the cows, aired and set to rights the house, kneaded cakes of whitest wheat, cakes for dainty mouths to eat, next churned butter, whipped up cream, fed their poultry, sat and sewed, talked as modest maidens should, Lizzie with an open heart, Laura in an absent dream, one content, one sick in part, one warbling for the mere bright day's delight, one longing for the night. At length slow evening came, they went with pitchers to the reedy brook, Lizzie most placid in her look, Laura most like a leaping flame. They drew the gurgling water from its deep, Lizzie plucked purple and rich golden flags, then turning homewards said, "The sunset flashes those furthest loftiest crags. Come, Laura, not another maiden lags, no wilful squirrel wags, the beasts and birds are fast asleep." But Laura loitered still among the rushes, and said the bank was steep, and said the hour was early still, the dew not fallen, the wind not chill, listening ever but not catching the customary cry, come by," with its iterated jingle of sugar-baited words. Not for all her watching, once discerning even one goblin, racing, whisking, tumbling, hobbling, let alone the herds that used to tramp along the glen, in groups or single, of brisk fruit merchant men. Till Lizzie urged, "O Laura, come! I hear the fruit call, but I dare not look. You should not loiter longer at this brook. Come with me home. The stars rise, the moon bends her arc, each glowworm winks her spark. Let us get home before the night grows dark, for clouds may gather, though this is summer weather, put out the lights and drench us through. Then if we lost our way, what should we do?" Laura turned cold as stone, to find her sister heard that cry alone. That goblin cry, "Come buy our fruits, come buy." Must she then buy no more such dainty fruits? Must she no more such success pasture find, gone deaf and blind? Her tree of life drooped from the root. She said not one word in her heart's sore ache, but peering through the dimness, not discerning, trudged home, her pitcher dripping all the way, so crept to bed, and lay silent till Lizzie slept, then sat up in a passionate yearning, and gnashed her teeth for balked desire, and wept as if her heart would break. Day after day, night after night, Laura kept watch in vain. In sullen silence of exceeding pain, she never caught again the goblin cry, "Come buy, come buy." She never spied the goblin men hawking their fruits along the glen. But when the noon waxed bright, her hair grew thin and gray. She dwindled as the fair full moon doth turn to swift decay and burn her fire away. One day, remembering her kernel stone, she set it by a wall that faced the south, dewed it with tears, hoped for a root, watched for a waxing shoot. But there came none. It never saw the sun. It never felt the trickling moisture run, while with sunk eyes and faded mouth she dreamed of melons, as a traveler sees false waves in desert drouth, with shade of leaf-crowned trees, and burns the thirstier in the sandful breeze. She no more swept the house, tended the fowls or cows, fetched honey, kneaded cakes of wheat, brought water from the brook, but sat down listless in the chimney nook, and would not eat. Tender Lizzie could not bear to watch her sister's cankerous care, yet not to share. She night and morning caught the goblin's cry, "Come buy our orchard fruits, come buy, come buy." Beside the brook, along the glen, she heard the tramp of goblin men. The voice and stir poor Laura could not hear, longed to buy fruit to comfort her, but feared to pay too dear. She thought of Jeannie in her grave, who should have been a bride, but who for joys brides hope to have fell sick and died, in her gay prime, in earliest winter time, with the first glazing rime, with the first snowfall of crisp winter time. Till Laura dwindling seemed knocking at death's door, then Lizzie weighed no more, better and worse, but put a silver penny in her purse, kissed Laura, crossed the heath with clumps of firs, at twilight halted by the brook, and for the first time in her life began to listen and look. Laughed every goblin when they spied her peeping, came towards her hobbling, flying, running, leaping, puffing and blowing, chuckling, clapping, crowing, clucking and gobbling, mopping and mowing, full of airs and graces, pulling wry faces, demure grimaces, cat-like and rat-like, ratel and wombat-like, snail-paced in a hurry, parrot-voiced and whistler, helter-skelter, hurry-scurry, chattering like magpies, fluttering like pigeons, gliding like fishes, hugged her and kissed her, squeezed and caressed her, stretched up their dishes, panniers and plates.
Look at our apples, russet and dun. Bob at our cherries, bite at our peaches, citrons and dates. Grapes for the asking, pears red with basking out in the sun, plums on their twigs, pluck them and suck them, pomegranates, figs.
Good folk, said Lizzie, mindful of Jeannie, give me much and many, held out her apron, tossed them her penny.
Nay, take a seat with us, honour and eat with us, they answered grinning. Our feast is but beginning, night yet is early, warm and dew pearly. wakeful and starry. Such fruits as these no man can carry. Half their bloom would fly, half their dew would dry, half their flavor would pass by. Sit down and feast with us, be welcome guest with us, cheer you and rest with us.
"Thank you," said Lizzie, "but one waits at home alone for me. So, without further parleying, if you will not sell me any of your fruits through much and many, give me back my silver penny I tossed you for a fee." They began to scratch their pates, no longer wagging, purring, but visibly demurring, grunting and snarling. One called her proud, cross-grained, uncivil. Their tones waxed loud, their looks were evil. Lashing their tails, they trod and hustled her, elbowed and jostled her, clawed with their nails, barking, mewing, hissing, mocking, tore her gown and soiled her stocking, twitched her hair out by the roots, stamped upon her tender feet, held her hands and squeezed their fruits against her mouth to make her eat. White and golden Lizzie stood, like a lily in a flood, like a rock of blue-veined stone, lashed by tides obstreperously, like a beacon left alone in a hoary, roaring sea, sending up a golden fire, like a fruit-crowned orange tree, white with blossoms honey-sweet, sore beset by wasp and bee, like a royal virgin town, topped with gilded dome and spire, close beleaguered by a fleet, mad to tug her standard down. One may lead a horse to water, 20 cannot make him drink. Though the goblins cuffed and caught her, coaxed and fought her, bullied and besought her, scratched her, pinched her black as ink, kicked and knocked her, mauled and mocked her, Lizzie uttered not a word, would not open lip from lip, lest they should cram a mouthful in, but laughed in heart to feel the drip of juice that syruped all her face, and lodged in dimples of her chin, and streaked her neck which quaked like curd. At last the evil people, worn out by her resistance, flung back her penny, kicked their fruit along whichever road they took, not leaving root or stone or shoot. Some writhed into the ground, some dived into the brook with ring and ripple, some scudded on the gale without a sound, some vanished in the distance. In a smart ache, tingle, Lizzie went her way, knew not was it night or day, sprang up the bank, tore through the firs, threaded copse and dingle, and heard her penny jingle, bouncing in her purse. Its bounce was music to her ear. She ran and ran, as if she feared some goblin man dogged her with jibe or curse, or something worse. But not one goblin scurried after, nor was she pricked by fear. The kind heart made her windy paced, that urged her home quite out of breath with haste, and inward laughter. She cried, "Laura!" up the garden. "Did you miss me? Come and kiss me. Never mind my bruises. Hug me, kiss me, suck my juices, squeezed from goblin fruits for you. Goblin pulp and goblin dew. Eat me, drink me, love me. Laura, make much of me. For your sake I have braved the glen, and had to do with goblin merchantmen." Laura started from her chair, flung her arms up in the air, clutched her hair. "Lizzie, Lizzie, have you tasted for my sake the fruit forbidden? Must your light like mine be hidden? Your young life like mine be wasted, undone in mine undoing, and ruined in my ruin, thirsty, cankered, goblin-ridden?" She clung about her sister, kissed and kissed and kissed her. Tears once again refreshed her shrunken eyes, dropping like rain after long sultry drouth. Shaking with anguish, fear, and pain, she kissed and kissed her with a hungry mouth. Her lips began to scorch. That juice was wormwood to her tongue. She loathed the feast. Writhing as one possessed, she leapt and sung, rent all her robe and wrung her hands in lamentable haste, and beat her breast. Her locks streamed like the torch borne by a racer at full speed, or like the mane of horses in their flight, or like an eagle when she stems the light straight toward the sun, or like a caged thing freed, or like a flying flag when armies run. Swift fire spread through her veins, knocked at her heart, met the fire smoldering there, and overbore its lesser flame. She gorged on bitterness without a name. Ah, fool, to choose such part of soul-consuming care! Sense failed in the mortal strife, like the watchtower of a town which an earthquake shatters down, like a lightning-stricken mast, like a wind-uprooted tree spun about, like a foam-topped waterspout, cast down headlong in the sea. She fell at last, pleasure past and anguish past. Is it death or is it life? Life out of death. That night long Lizzie watched by her, counted her pulses' flagging stir, felt for her breath, held water to her lips and cooled her face with tears and fanning leaves. But when the first birds chirped about their eaves, and early reapers plodded to the place of golden sheaves and dew-wet grass, bowed in the morning winds so brisk to pass, and new buds with new day opened of cup-like lilies on the stream, Laura awoke, as from a dream, laughed in the innocent old way, hugged Lizzie, but not twice or thrice. Her gleaming locks showed not one thread of gray, her breath was sweet as May, and light danced in her eyes. Days, weeks, months, years afterwards, when both were wives with children of their own, their mother hearts beset with fears, their lives bound up in tender lives, Laura would call the little ones and tell them of her early prime, those pleasant days long gone of not returning time, would talk about the haunted glen, the wicked, quaint fruit merchant men, their fruits like honey to the throat, but poison in the blood. Men sell not such in any town. Would tell them how her sister stood in deadly peril to do her good and win the fiery antidote. Then, joining hands to little hands, would bid them cling together. For there is no friend like a sister, in calm or stormy weather, to cheer one on the tedious way, to fetch one if one goes astray, to lift one if one totters down, to strengthen whilst one stands. By Margery Williams, The Velveteen Rabbit, or How Toys Become Real. There was once a velveteen rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy, as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink sateen. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking, with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stocking, nuts and oranges, and a toy engine, and chocolate almonds, and a clockwork mouse, but the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior, and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas, and pretended they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons, and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them, and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself, and he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion, who was made by the disabled soldiers and should have had broader views, put on airs and pretended he was connected with government. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace, and the only person who was kind to him at all was the Skin Horse. The Skin Horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away, and he knew that they were only toys, and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced like the skin horse understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day, when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nanny came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?"
"Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real."
"Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit.
"Sometimes,"
said the skin horse, for he was always truthful.
"When you are real, you don't mind being hurt."
"Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked. "Or bit by bit?"
"It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or who have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand."
"I suppose you are real," said the rabbit, and then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the skin horse might be sensitive, but the skin horse only smiled.
"The boy's uncle made me real," he said. "That was a great many years ago, but once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always."
The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like, and yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatever, she went swooping about like a great wind and hustled them away in cupboards. She called this tidying up, and the playthings all hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind it so much, for wherever he was thrown he came down soft. One evening, when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that he always slept with. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for china dogs at bedtime, so she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. "Here," she said, "take your old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you." And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him into the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he missed, too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery, when all the house was silent, and his talks with the skin horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him, and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes that he said were like the burrows the real rabbits lived in. And they had splendid games together, in whispers, when Nana had gone away to her supper, and left the nightlight burning on the mantelpiece. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close around him all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy. So happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail becoming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow, and picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk, and Nana had to come look for him with the candle, because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet through with the dew and quite earthy from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off with a corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew that what the skin horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst, and into his boot-button eyes, that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it next morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare, if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived there was a wood, and in the long June evenings the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play at brigands among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken, where he would be quite cozy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants that ran to and fro between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet patted softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up, but he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Ho!" said the furry rabbit. "It's as easy as anything." And he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you can," he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs!" And he began to laugh. "I have!" cried the little rabbit. "I have got hind legs. I am sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show me, like this," said the wild rabbit, and he began to whirl round and round, till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather sit still." But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen rabbit's ear, and then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "He doesn't smell right," he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am real. The boy said so." And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Oh, do come back. I know I am real." But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh dear," he thought, "why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken and hoping that they would come back, but they never returned, and presently the sun sank lower, and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit any more, except to the boy. To him he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real, and when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then, one day, the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, and through it all the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him someone might take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day long. But he snuggled down patiently, and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies, and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side, and one day they let him get up and dress. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the boy out onto the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all, while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes, with just his head peeping out, and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in bed must be burnt. "Hurrah!" thought the little rabbit. "Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside." For the boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in, and the tiny crabs, and the sand castles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about this old bunny?" she asked.
"That," said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once." "What? Nonsense. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that any more."
And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes, but the boy was too excited to care very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wiggling a bit he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Nearby he could see the thicket of raspberry canes, growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other. The fairy huts in the flower bed, the quiet evenings in the wood when he lay in the bracken and the little ants ran over his paws, the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened, for where the tear had fallen a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry, and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of it there stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair, and her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little rabbit, and gathered him up in her arms, and kissed him on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out, and the children don't need them any more, then I come and take them away with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvety grass. But when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbitland, for he is going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved, For when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy had kissed him that last time, she had changed him altogether, and he might have sat there a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose, and before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it. And he found that he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling round as the others did. And he grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed, and winter, and in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, and the spots still showed through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. By Oscar Wilde. The Nightingale and the Rose. "She said that she would dance with me if I brought her red roses," cried the young student. "But in all my garden there is no red rose." From her nest in the holm oak tree, the nightingale heard him, and she looked out through the leaves and wondered. "No red rose in all my garden," he cried, and his beautiful eyes filled with tears. "Oh, on what little things does happiness depend! I have read all that the wise men have written, and all the secrets of philosophy are mine, yet for want of a red rose is my life made wretched." "Here at last is a true lover," said the nightingale. "Night after night have I sung of him, though I knew him not. Night after night have I told his story to the stars, and now I see him. His hair is dark as the hyacinth blossom, and his lips are red as the rose of his desire. But passion has made his face like pale ivory, and sorrow has set her seal upon his brow." "The prince gives a ball tomorrow night," murmured the young student, "and my love will be of the company. If I bring her a red rose, she will dance with me till dawn. If I bring her a red rose, I shall hold her in my arms, and she will lean her head upon my shoulder, and her hand will be clasped in mine. But there is no red rose in my garden, so I shall sit lonely, and she will pass me by. She will have no heed of me, and my heart will break." "Here indeed is the true lover," said the nightingale. "What I sing of he suffers. What is joy to me, to him is pain. Surely love is a wonderful thing. It is more precious than emeralds, and dearer than fine opals. Pearls and pomegranates cannot buy it, nor is it set forth in the marketplace. It may not be purchased of the merchants, or can it be weighed out in the balance of gold." "The musicians will sit in their gallery," said the young student, "and play upon their stringed instruments, and my love will dance to the sound of the harp and the violin. She will dance so lightly that her feet will not touch the floor, and the courtiers in their gay dresses will throng round her. But with me she will not dance, for I have no red rose to give her." And he flung himself down on the grass, and buried his face in his hands, and wept. "Why is he weeping?" asked a little green lizard, as he ran past him with his tail in the air. "Why, indeed," said a butterfly, who was fluttering about after a sunbeam. "Why, indeed?" whispered a daisy to his neighbor in a soft, low voice. "He is weeping for a red rose," said the nightingale.
"For a red rose?" they cried. "How very ridiculous!"
And the little lizard, who was something of a cynic, laughed outright. But the nightingale understood the secret of the student's sorrow, and she sat silent in the oak tree and thought about the mystery of love. Suddenly she spread her brown wings for flight and soared into the air. She passed through the grove like a shadow, and like a shadow she sailed across the garden. In the center of the grass plot was standing a beautiful rose tree, and when she saw it, she flew over to it and lit upon a spray. "Give me a red rose," she cried, "and I will sing you my sweetest song." But the tree shook its head. "My roses are white," it answered, "as white as the foam of the sea, and whiter than the snow upon the mountain. But go to my brother, who grows round the old sundial, and perhaps he will give you what you want." So the nightingale flew over to the rose tree that was growing round the old sundial. "Give me a red rose," she cried, "and I will sing you my sweetest song." But the tree shook its head. "My roses are yellow," it answered, "as yellow as the hair of the mermaiden who sits upon an amber throne, and yellower than the daffodil that blooms in the meadow before the mower comes with his scythe. But go to my brother, who grows beneath the student's window, and perhaps he will give you what you want." So the nightingale flew over to the rose tree that was growing beneath the student's window. "Give me a red rose," she cried, "and I will sing you my sweetest song." But the tree shook its head. "My roses are red," it answered, "as red as the feet of the dove, and redder than the great fans of coral that wave and wave in the ocean cavern. But the winter has chilled my veins, and the frost has nipped my buds, and the storm has broken my branches, and I shall have no roses at all this year." "One red rose is all I want," cried the nightingale. "Only one red rose. Is there no way by which I can get it?" "There is a way," answered the tree, "but it is so terrible that I dare not tell it to you." "Tell it to me," said the nightingale. "I am not afraid." "If you want a red rose," said the tree, "you must build it out of music by moonlight, and stain it with your own heart's blood. You must sing to me with your breast against a thorn. All night long you must sing to me, and the thorn must pierce your heart, and your life-blood must flow into my veins and become mine." "Death is a great price to pay for a red rose," cried the nightingale, "and life is very dear to all. It is pleasant to sit in the green wood, and to watch the sun in his chariot of gold, and the moon in her chariot of pearl. Sweet is the scent of the hawthorn, and sweet are the bluebells that hide in the valley, and the heather that blows on the hill. Yet love is better than life, and what is the heart of a bird compared to the heart of a man?" So she spread her brown wings for flight, and soared into the air. She swept over the garden like a shadow, and like a shadow she sailed through the grove. The young student was lying on the grass where she had left him, and the tears were not yet dry in his beautiful eyes. "Be happy," cried the nightingale. "Be happy. You shall have your red rose. I will build it out of music by moonlight, and stain it with my own heart's blood. All that I ask of you in return is that you will be a true lover, for love is wiser than philosophy, though she is wise, and mightier than power, though he be mighty. Flame-colored are his wings, and colored like flame is his body. His lips are sweet as honey, and his breath is like frankincense." The student looked up from the grass and listened, but he could not understand what the nightingale was saying to him, for he only knew the things that are written down in books. But the oak tree understood, and felt sad, for he was very fond of the little nightingale who had built her nest in his branches. "Sing me one last song," he whispered. "I shall feel very lonely when you are gone." So the nightingale sang to the oak tree, and her voice was like water bubbling from a silver jar. When she had finished her song, the student got lip and pulled a notebook and a lead pencil out of his pocket. "She has form," he said to himself, as he walked away through the grove. "That cannot be denied to her. But has she got feeling? I am afraid not. In fact, she is like most artists. She is all style without any sincerity. She would not sacrifice herself for others. She thinks merely of music, and everybody knows that the arts are selfish. Still, it must be admitted that she has some beautiful notes in her voice. What a pity it is that they do not mean anything, or do any practical good." And he went into his room, and lay down on his little pallet bed, and began to think of his love, and, after a time, he fell asleep. And when the moon shone in the heavens, the nightingale flew to the rose tree, and set her breast against the thorn. All night long she sang with her breast against the thorn, and the cold crystal moon leaned down and listened. All night long she sang, and the thorn went deeper and deeper into her breast, and her life-blood ebbed away from her. She sang first of the birth of love in the heart of a boy and a girl, and on the topmost spray of rose tree there blossomed a marvelous rose, petal following petal, as song followed song. Yale was it, at first, as the mist that hangs over the river, pale as the feet of the morning, and silver as the wings of the dawn. As the shadow of a rose in a mirror of silver, as the shadow of a rose in a water pool, so was the rose that blossomed on the topmost spray of the tree. But the tree cried to the nightingale to press closer against the thorn. "Press closer, little nightingale," cried the tree, "or the day will come before the rose is finished." So the nightingale pressed closer against the thorn, and louder grew her song, for she sang of the birth of passion in the soul of a man and a maid. And a delicate flush of pink came into the leaves of the rose, like the flush in the face of the bridegroom when he kisses the lips of the bride. But the thorn had not yet reached her heart, so the rose's heart remained white, for only a nightingale's heart's blood can crimson the heart of a rose. The tree cried to the nightingale to press closer against the thorn. "Press closer, little nightingale," cried the tree, "or the day will come before the rose is finished." So the nightingale pressed closer against the thorn, and the thorn touched her heart, and a fierce pang of pain shot through her. Bitter, bitter was the pain, and wilder grew her song, for she sang of the love that is perfected by death, of the love that dies not in the tomb. And the marvelous rose became crimson, like the rose of the eastern sky. Crimson was the girdle of petals, and crimson as a ruby was the heart. But the nightingale's voice grew fainter, and her little wings began to beat, and a film came over her eyes. Fainter and fainter grew her song, and she felt something choking her in her throat. Then she gave one last burst of music. The white moon heard it, and she forgot the dawn, and lingered on in the sky. The red rose heard it, and it trembled all over with ecstasy, and opened its petals to the cold morning air. Echo bore it to her purple cavern in the hills, and woke the sleeping shepherds from their dreams. It floated through the reeds of the river, and they carried its message to the sea. "Look, look," cried the tree, "the rose is finished now." But the nightingale made no answer, for she was lying dead in the long grass, with the thorn in her heart. And at noon the student opened his window and looked out. "Why, what a wonderful piece of luck!" he cried. "Here is a red rose. I have never seen any rose like it in all my life. It is so beautiful that I am sure it has a long Latin name." And he leaned down and plucked it. Then he put on his hat and ran up to the professor's house with the rose in his hand. The daughter of the professor was sitting in the doorway winding blue silk on a reel, and her little dog was lying at her feet. "You said that you would dance with me if I brought you a red rose," cried the student. "Here is the reddest rose in all the world. You will wear it tonight, next to your heart. As we dance together, it will tell you how I love you." But the girl frowned. "I am afraid it will not go with my dress," she answered. "And besides, the Chamberlain's nephew has sent me some real jewels, and everybody knows that jewels cost far more than flowers." "Well, upon my word, you are very ungrateful," said the student angrily, and he threw the rose into the street, where it fell into the gutter, and a cartwheel went over it. "Ungrateful?" said the girl. "I tell you what, you are very rude, and after all, who are you? Only a student. Why, I don't believe you have even got silver buckles to your shoes, as the Chamberlain's nephew has." And she got up from her chair and went into the house. "What a silly thing love is," said the student as he walked away. "It is not half as useful as logic, for it does not prove anything, and it is always telling one of things that are not going to happen, and making one believe things that are not true. In fact, it is quite unpractical, and as in this age to be practical is everything, I shall go back to philosophy and study metaphysics." So he returned to his room and pulled out a great dusty book and began to read. The Steadfast Tin Soldier by Hans Christian Andersen. There were once 25 tin soldiers. They were all brothers, born of the same old tin spoon. They shouldered their muskets and looked straight ahead of them, splendid in their uniforms, all red and blue. The very first thing in the world that they heard was, "Tin soldiers!" A small boy shouted it and clapped his hands as the lid was lifted off their box on his birthday. He immediately set them up on the table. All the soldiers looked exactly alike except one. He looked a little different as he had been cast last of all. The tin was short, so he had only one leg. But there he stood, as steady on one leg as any of the other soldiers on there too. But just you see, he'll be the remarkable one. On the table with the soldiers were many other playthings, and one that no eye could miss was a marvelous castle of cardboard. It had little windows through which you could look right inside it, and in front of the castle were miniature trees around a little mirror supposed to represent a lake. The wax swans that swam on its surface were reflected in the mirror. All this was very pretty, but prettiest of all was the little lady who stood in the open doorway of the castle. Though she was a paper doll, she wore a dress of the fluffiest gauze. A tiny blue ribbon went over her shoulder for a scarf, and in the middle of it shone a spangle that was as big as her face. The little lady held out both her arms, as a ballet dancer does, and one leg was lifted so high behind her that the tin soldier couldn't see it at all, and he supposed she must have only one leg, as he did. "That would be a wife for me," he thought, "but maybe she's too grand. She lives in a castle. I have only a box, with 24 roommates to share it. That's no place for her, but I must try to make her acquaintance." Still, as stiff as when he stood at attention, he lay down on the table behind a snuff-box, where he could admire the dainty little dancer, who kept standing on one leg without ever losing her balance. When the evening came, the other tin soldiers were put away in their box, and the people of the house went to bed. Now the toys began to play among themselves at visits and battles and at giving balls. The tin soldiers rattled about in their box, for they wanted to play too, but they could not get the lid open. The nutcracker turned somersaults, and the slate pencils squeaked out jokes on the slate. The toys made such a noise that they woke up the canary bird, who made them a speech, all in verse. The only two who stayed still were the tin soldier and the little dancer. Without ever swerving from the tip of one toe, she held out her arms to him, and the tin soldier was just as steadfast on his one leg. Not once did he take his eyes off her. Then the clock struck 12, and clack! Up popped the lid of the snuff-box. But there was no snuff in it. No, out bounced a little black bogey, a jack-in-the-box. "Tin soldier," he said, "will you please keep your eyes to yourself?" The tin soldier pretended not to hear. The bogey said, "Just you wait till tomorrow." But when morning came and the children got up, The soldier was set on the window ledge, and whether the bogey did it, or there was a gust of wind, all of a sudden the window flew open, and the soldier pitched out headlong from the 3rd floor. He fell at breathtaking speed, and landed cap first, with his bayonet buried between the paving stones, and his one leg stuck straight in the air. The housemaid and the little boy ran down to look for him, and though they nearly stepped on the tin soldier, they walked right past him without seeing him. If the soldier had called, "Here I am," they would surely have found him, but he thought it contemptible to raise an uproar while he was wearing his uniform. Soon it began to rain. The drops fell faster and faster, until they came down by the bucketful. As soon as the rain let up, along came 2 young rapscallions. "Hi, look," one of them said. "There's a tin soldier. Let's send him sailing." They made a boat out of newspaper, put the tin soldier in the middle of it, and away he went down the gutter, with the 2 young rapscallions running beside him and clapping their hands. High heavens! How the waves splashed, and how fast the water ran down the gutter. Don't forget that it had just been raining by the bucketful. The paper boat pitched and tossed, and sometimes it whirled about so rapidly that it made the soldier's head spin. But he stood as steady as ever, never once flinching. He kept his eyes front and carried his gun shoulder high. Suddenly, the boat rushed under a long plank where the gutter was boarded over. It was as dark as the soldier's own box. "Where can I be going?" the soldier wondered. "This must be that black bogey's revenge. Ah, if only I had the little lady with me. It could be twice as dark here for all that I would care." Out popped a great water rat who lived under the gutter plank. "Have you a passport?" said the rat. "Hand it over." The soldier kept quiet and held his musket tighter. On rushed the boat, and the rat came right after it, gnashing his teeth as he called to the sticks and straws. "Halt him! Stop him! He didn't pay his toll! He hasn't shown his passport!" But the current ran stronger and stronger. The soldier could see daylight ahead where the board ended, but he also heard a roar that would frighten the bravest of us. "Hold on!" Right at the end of that gutter plank, the water poured into the great canal. It was as dangerous to him as a waterfall would be to us. He was so near it he could not possibly stop. The boat plunged into the whirlpool. The poor tin soldier stood as staunch as he could, and no one can say that he so much as blinked an eye. Thrice and again the boat spun around. It filled to the top and was bound to sink. The water was up to his neck, and still the boat went down deeper, 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 and the paper got soft and limp. Then the water rushed over his head. He thought of the pretty little dancer whom he'd never see again, and in his ears rang an old, old song. "Farewell, farewell, O warrior brave, nobody can from death thee save." And now the paper boat broke beneath him, and the soldier sank right through, and just at that moment he was swallowed by a most enormous fish. My, how dark it was inside that fish! It was darker than under the gutter plank, and it was so cramped. But the tin soldier still was staunch. He lay there full length, soldier fashion, with musket to shoulder. Then the fish flopped and floundered in a most unaccountable way. Finally it was perfectly still, and after a while something struck through him like a flash of lightning. The tin soldier saw daylight again, and heard a voice say, "The tin soldier!" The fish had been caught, carried to market, bought, and brought to a kitchen, where the cook cut him open with her big knife. She picked the soldier up bodily between her 2 fingers and carried him off upstairs. Everyone wanted to see this remarkable traveler, who had traveled about in a fish's stomach, but the tin soldier took no pride in it. They put him on the table, and, lo and behold, what curious things can happen in this world. There he was, back in the same room as before. He saw the same children, the same toys were on the table, and there was the same fine castle with the pretty little dancer. She still balanced on one leg, with the other raised high. She too was steadfast. That touched the soldier so deeply that he would have cried tin tears, only soldiers never cry. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and never a word was said. Just as things were going so nicely for them, one of the little boys snatched up the tin soldier and threw him into the stove. He did it for no reason at all. That black bogey in the snuff box must have put him up to it. The tin soldier stood there dressed in flames. He felt a terrible heat, but whether it came from the flames or from his love he didn't know. He'd lost his splendid colors, maybe from his hard journey, maybe from grief. Nobody can say. He looked at the little lady, and she looked at him, and he felt himself melting, but still he stood steadfast, with his musket held trim on his shoulder. Then the door blew open. A puff of wind struck the dancer. She flew like a sylph, straight into the fire with the soldier, blazed up in a flash, and was gone. The tin soldier melted, all in a lump. The next day, when a servant took up the ashes, she found him in the shape of a little tin heart. But of the pretty dancer, nothing was left except her spangle, and it was burned as black as coal. The Golden Bird by the Brothers Grimm. In the olden time there was a king who had behind his palace a beautiful pleasure garden in which there was a tree that bore golden apples. When the apples were getting ripe, they were counted, but on the very next morning one was missing. This was told to the king, and he ordered that a watch should be kept every night beneath the tree. The king had 3 sons, the eldest of whom he sent, as soon as night came on, into the garden. But when midnight came, he could not keep himself from sleeping, and next morning again an apple was gone. The following night the second son had to keep watch. It fared no better with him. As soon as 12 o'clock had struck, he fell asleep, and in the morning an apple was gone. Now it came to the turn of the third son to watch, and he was quite ready, but the king had not much trust in him, and thought that he would be of less use even than his brothers. But at last he let him go. The youth lay down beneath the tree, but kept awake, and did not let sleep master him. When it struck 12, something rustled through the air, and in the moonlight he saw a bird coming whose feathers were all shining with gold. The bird alighted on the tree, and had just plucked off an apple when the youth shot an arrow at him. The bird flew off, but the arrow had struck his plumage, and one of his golden feathers fell down. The youth picked it up, and the next morning took it to the king, and told him what he had seen in the night. The king called his council together, and everyone declared that a feather like this was worth more than the whole kingdom.
"If the feather is so precious," declared the king, "one alone will not do for me. I must and will have the whole bird."
The eldest son set out. He trusted to his cleverness, and thought that he would easily find the golden bird. When he had gone some distance, he saw a fox sitting at the edge of a wood. So he cocked his gun and took aim at him. The fox cried, "Do not shoot me, and in return I will give you some good counsel. You are on your way to the Golden Bird, and this evening you will come to a village in which stand 2 inns opposite to one another. One of them is lighted up brightly, and all goes on merrily within. But do not go into it. Go rather into the other, even though it seems a bad one." "How can such a silly beast give wise advice?" thought the king's son, and he pulled the trigger. But he missed the fox, who stretched out his tail and ran quickly into the wood. So he pursued his way, and by evening came to the village where the 2 inns were. In one they were singing and dancing. The other had a poor, miserable look. "I should be a fool indeed," he thought, "if I were to go into the shabby tavern and pass by the good one." So he went into the cheerful one, lived there in riot and revel, and forgot the bird and his father, and all good counsels. When some time had passed, and the eldest son for month after month did not come back home, the second set out, wishing to find the golden bird. The fox met him as he met the eldest, and gave him the good advice, of which he took no heed. He came to the 2 inns, and his brother was standing at the window of the one from which came the music, and called out to him. He could not resist, but went inside, and lived only for pleasure. Again some time passed, and then the king's youngest son wanted to set off and try his luck, but his father would not allow it. "It is of no use," said he. "He will find the golden bird still less than his brothers, and if a mishap were to befall him, he knows not how to help himself. He is a little wanting at best." But at last, as he had no peace, he let him go. Again the fox was sitting outside the wood, and begged for his life, and offered his good advice. The youth was good-natured, and said, "Be easy, little fox, I will do you no harm." "You shall not repent it," answered the fox, "and that you may get on more quickly, get up behind me on my tail." And scarcely had he seated himself when the fox began to run, and away he went over stock and stone, till his hair whistled in the wind. When they came to the village, the youth got off. He followed the good advice, and without looking round turned into the little inn, where he spent the night quietly. The next morning, as soon as he got into the open country, there sat the fox already, and said, "I will tell you further what you have to do. Go on quite straight, and at last you will come to a castle, in front of which a whole regiment of soldiers is lying. But do not trouble yourself about them, for they will all be asleep and snoring. Go through the midst of them straight into the castle, and go through all the rooms, till at last you will come to a chamber where a golden bird is hanging in a wooden cage. Close by there stands an empty gold cage for show, but beware of taking the bird out of the common cage and putting it into the fine one, or it may go badly with you." With these words the fox again stretched out his tail, and the king's son seated himself upon it, and away he went over stock and stone, till his hair whistled in the wind. When he came to the castle, he found everything as the fox had said. The king's son went into the chamber where the golden bird was shut up in a wooden cage, whilst a golden one stood hard by, and the 3 golden apples lay about the room. "But," thought he, "it would be absurd if I were to leave the beautiful bird in the common and ugly cage." So he opened the door, laid hold of it, and put it into the golden cage. But at the same moment the bird uttered a shrill cry. The soldiers awoke, rushed in, and took him off to prison. The next morning he was taken before a court of justice, and as he confessed everything, was sentenced to death. The king, however, said that he would grant him his life on one condition, namely, if he brought him the golden horse which ran faster than the wind, and in that case he should receive, over and above, as a reward, the golden bird. The king's son set off, but he sighed and was sorrowful, for how was he to find the golden horse? But all at once he saw his old friend the fox sitting on the road. "Look you," said the fox, "this has happened because you did not give heed to me. However, be of good courage. I will give you my help, and tell you how to get to the golden horse. You must go straight on, and you will come to a castle, where in the stables stands the horse. The grooms will be lying in front of the stable, but they will be asleep and snoring, and you can quietly lead out the golden horse. But of one thing you must take heed. Put on him the common saddle of wood and leather, and not the golden one, which hangs close by, else it will go ill with you." Then the fox stretched out his tail, the king's son seated himself upon it, and away he went over stock and stone, until his hair whistled in the wind. Everything happened just as the fox had said. The prince came to the stable in which the golden horse was standing, but just as he was going to put the common saddle upon him, he thought, "It will be a shame to such a beautiful beast, if I do not give him the good saddle which belongs to him by right." But scarcely had the golden saddle touched the horse, than he began to neigh loudly. The grooms awoke, seized the youth, and threw him into prison. The next morning he was sentenced by the court to death, but the king promised to grant him his life, and the golden horse as well, if he could bring back the beautiful princess from the golden castle. With a heavy heart the youth set out, yet luckily for him he soon found the trusty fox. "I ought only to leave you to your ill luck," said the fox, "but I pity you, and will help you once more out of your trouble. This road takes you straight to the golden castle. You will reach it by eventide, and at night, when everything is quiet, the beautiful princess goes to the bathing house to bathe. When she enters it, run up to her and give her a kiss. Then she will follow you, and you can take her away with you. Only do not allow her to take leave of her parents first, or it will go ill with you." Then the fox stretched out his tail. The king's son seated himself upon it, and away the fox went, over stock and stone, till his hair whistled in the wind. When he reached the golden castle, it was just as the fox had said. He waited until midnight, when everything lay in deep sleep, and the beautiful princess was going to the bathing house. Then he sprang out and gave her a kiss. She said that she would like to go with him, but she asked him pitifully and with tears to allow her first to take leave of her parents. At first he withstood her prayer, but when she wept more and more and fell at his feet, he at last gave in. But no sooner had the maiden reached the bedside of her father than he and all the rest in the castle awoke, and the youth was laid hold of and put into prison. The next morning the king said to him, "Your life is forfeited, and you can only find mercy if you take away the hill which stands in front of my window, and prevents my seeing beyond it, and you must finish it all within 8 days. If you do that, you shall have my daughter as your reward." The king's son began, and dug and shoveled without leaving off. But when after 7 days he saw how little he had done, and how all his work was as good as nothing, he fell into great sorrow and gave up all hope. But on the evening of the 7th day the fox appeared and said, "You do not deserve that I should take any trouble about you, but just go away and lie down to sleep, and I will do the work for you." The next morning when he awoke and looked out of the window, the hill had gone. The youth ran, full of joy, to the king, and told him that the task was fulfilled, and whether he liked it or not, the king had to hold to his word and give him his daughter. So the two set forth together, and it was not long before the trusty fox came up with them. "You have certainly got what is best," said he, "but the golden horse also belongs to the maiden of the golden castle." "How shall I get it?" asked the youth. "That I will tell you," answered the fox. "First, take the maiden to the king who sent you to the golden castle. There will be unheard of rejoicing. They will gladly give you the golden horse, and will bring it out to you. Mount it as soon as possible, and offer your hand to all in farewell. Last of all to the beautiful maiden, and as soon as you have taken her hand, swing her up onto the horse and gallop away, and no one will be able to bring you back, for the horse runs faster than the wind." All was carried out successfully, and the king's son carried off the beautiful princess on the golden horse. The fox did not remain behind, and said to the youth, "Now I will help you to get the golden bird. When you come near to the castle where the golden bird is to be found, let the maiden get down, and I will take her into my care. Then ride with the golden horse into the castle yard. There will be great rejoicing at the sight, and they will bring out the golden bird for you. As soon as you have the cage in your hand, gallop back to us, and take the maiden away again." When the plan had succeeded, and the king's son was about to ride home with his treasures, the fox said, "Now you shall reward me for my help." "What do you require for it?" asked the youth. "When you get into the wood yonder, shoot me dead, and chop off my head and feet." "That would be fine gratitude," said the king's son. "I cannot possibly do that for you." The fox said, "If you will not do it, I must leave you, but before I go away I will give you a piece of good advice. Be careful about 2 things. Buy no gallows flesh, and do not sit at the edge of any well." And then he ran into the wood. The youth thought, "That is a wonderful beast. He has strange whims. Who is going to buy gallows flesh? And the desire to sit at the edge of a well, it has never yet seized me." He rode on with the beautiful maiden, and his road took him again through the village in which his 2 brothers had remained. There was a great stir and noise, and when he asked what was going on, he was told that 2 men were going to be hanged. As he came nearer to the place, he saw that they were his brothers, who had been playing all kinds of wicked pranks, and had squandered all their wealth. He inquired whether they could not be set free. "If you will pay for them," answered the people. "But why should you waste your money on wicked men, and buy them free?" He did not think twice about it, but paid for them, and when they were set free they all went on their way together. They came to the wood where the fox had first met them. As it was cool and pleasant within it, the 2 brothers said, "Let us rest a little by the well, and eat and drink." He agreed, and whilst they were talking he forgot himself, and sat down upon the edge of the well without thinking of any evil. But the 2 brothers threw him backwards into the well, took the maiden, the horse, and the bird, and went home to their father. "Here we bring you not only the golden bird," said they, "we have won the golden horse also, and the maiden from the golden castle." Then was there great joy, but the horse would not eat, the bird would not sing, and the maiden sat and wept. But the youngest brother was not dead. By good fortune the well was dry, and he fell upon soft moss without being hurt, but he could not get out again. Even in this strait the faithful fox did not leave him. It came and leapt down to him, and upbraided him for having forgotten its advice. "But yet I cannot give it up so," said he. I will help you up again into daylight." He bade him grasp his tail and keep tight hold of it, and then he pulled him up. "You are not out of all danger yet," said the fox. "Your brothers were not sure of your death, and have surrounded the wood with watchers, who are to kill you if you let yourself be seen." But a poor man was sitting upon the road, with whom the youth changed clothes, and in this way he got to the king's palace. No one knew him, but the bird began to sing, the horse began to eat, and the beautiful maiden left off weeping. The king, astonished, asked, "What does this mean?" Then the maiden said, "I do not know, but I have been so sorrowful, and now I am so happy. I feel as if my true bridegroom has come." She told him all that had happened, although the other brothers had threatened her with death if she were to betray anything. The king commanded that all the people who were in his castle should be brought before him, and amongst them came the youth in his ragged clothes. But the maiden knew him at once and fell upon his neck. The wicked brothers were seized and put to death, but he was married to the beautiful maiden and declared heir to the king. But how did it fare for the poor fox? Long afterwards the king's son was once again walking in the wood, when the fox met him and said, "You have everything now that you can wish for, but there is never an end to my misery, and yet it is in your power to free me." And again he asked him with tears to shoot him dead and chop off his head and feet. So he did it, and scarcely was it done when the fox was changed into a man, and was no other than the brother of the beautiful princess, who at last was freed from the magic charm which had been laid upon him. And now nothing more was wanting to their happiness, as long as they lived. La Belle et la Bête, also known as Beauty and the Beast, by Jeanne-Marie Leprince de Beaumont. There was once a very rich merchant who had 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters. Being a man of sense, he spared no cost for their education, but gave them all kinds of masters. His daughters were extremely handsome, especially the youngest. When she was little, everybody admired her and called her the Little Beauty, so that, as she grew up, she still went by the name of Beauty, which made her sisters very jealous. The youngest, as she was handsomer, was also better than her sisters. The 2 eldest had a great deal of pride because they were rich. They gave themselves ridiculous airs, and would not visit other merchants' daughters, nor keep company with any but persons of quality. They went out every day to parties of pleasure, balls, plays, concerts, and so forth, and they laughed at their youngest sister, because she spent the greatest part of her time in reading good books. As it was known that they were great fortunes, several eminent merchants made their addresses to them, but the 2 eldest said they would never marry unless they could meet with a duke, or an earl at the least. Beauty very civilly thanked them that courted her, and told them she was too young yet to marry, but chose to stay with her father a few years longer. All at once the merchant lost his whole fortune, excepting a small country house at a great distance from town, and told his children with tears in his eyes they must go there and work for their living. The 2 eldest answered that they would not leave the town, for they had several lovers, who they were sure would be glad to have them, though they had no fortune. But the good ladies were mistaken, for their lovers slighted and forsook them in their poverty. As they were not beloved on account of their pride, everybody said, "They do not deserve to be pitied. We are very glad to see their pride humbled. Let them go and give themselves quality airs in milking the cows and minding their dairy. But," added they, "we are extremely concerned for Beauty. She was such a charming, sweet-tempered creature, spoke so kindly to poor people, and was of such an affable, obliging behavior. Nay, several gentlemen would have married her, though they knew she had not a penny, but she told them she could not think of leaving her poor father in his misfortunes, but was determined to go along with him into the country to comfort and attend him. Poor Beauty at first was sadly grieved at the loss of her fortune. But, said she to herself, were I to cry ever so much, that would not make things better. I must try to make myself happy without a fortune." When they came to their country house, the merchant and his 3 sons applied themselves to husbandry and tillage, and Beauty rose at 4 in the morning and made haste to have the house clean and dinner ready for the family. In the beginning she found it very difficult, for she had not been used to work as a servant, but in less than 2 months she grew stronger and healthier than ever. After she had done her work, she read, played on the harpsichord, or else sung whilst she spun. On the contrary, her 2 sisters did not know how to spend their time. They got up at 10 and did nothing but saunter about the whole day, lamenting the loss of their fine clothes and acquaintance. "But to see our youngest sister," said they, one to the other, "what a poor, stupid, mean-spirited creature she is, to be contented with such an unhappy, dismal situation." The good merchant was of quite a different opinion. He knew very well that Beauty outshone her sisters, in her person as well as her mind, and admired her humility and industry, but above all her humility and patience. For her sisters not only left her all the work of the house to do, but insulted her every moment. The family had lived about a year in this retirement, when the merchant received a letter with an account that a vessel, on board of which he had effects, was safely arrived. This news had like to have turned the heads of the 2 eldest daughters, who immediately flattered themselves with the hopes of returning to town, for they were quite weary of a country life. And when they saw their father ready to set out, they begged of him to buy them new gowns, head dresses, ribbons, and all manner of trifles. But Beauty asked for nothing, for she thought to herself that all the money her father was going to receive would scarce be sufficient to purchase everything her sisters wanted. "What will you have, Beauty?" said her father. "Since you have the goodness to think of me," answered she, "be so kind to bring me a rose, for as none grows hereabouts, they are a kind of rarity." Not that Beauty cared for a rose, but she asked for something, lest she should seem by her example to condemn her sister's conduct, who would have said she did it only to look particular. The good man went on his journey, but when he came there they went to law with him about the merchandise, and after a great deal of trouble and pains to no purpose, he came back as poor as before. He was within 30 miles of his own house, thinking on the pleasure he should have in seeing his children again, when going through a large forest he lost himself. It rained and snowed terribly. Besides, the wind was so high that it threw him twice off his horse, and night coming on, he began to apprehend being either starved to death with cold and hunger, or else devoured by the wolves, whom he heard howling all around him, when, on a sudden, looking through a long walk of trees, he saw a light at some distance, and going on a little farther, perceived it came from a palace, illuminated from top to bottom. The merchant sent God thanks for this happy discovery, and hastened to the palace, but was greatly surprised at not meeting with anyone in the outer courts. His horse followed him, and seeing a large stable open, went in, and finding both hay and oats, the poor beast, who was almost famished, fell to eating very heartily. The merchant tied him up to the manger, and walking towards the house, where he saw no one, but entering into a large hall, he found a good fire, and a table plentifully set out, with but one place set. As he was wet quite through with the rain and snow, he drew near the fire to dry himself. "I hope," said he, "the master of the house or his servants will excuse the liberty I take. I suppose I will not be long before some of them appear." He waited a considerable time, until it struck 11, and still nobody came. At last he was so hungry that he could stay no longer, but took a chicken and ate it in 2 mouthfuls, trembling all the while. After this he drank a few glasses of wine, and growing more courageous he went out of the hall, and crossed through several grand apartments with magnificent furniture, until he came into a chamber, which had an exceeding good bed in it, and as he was very much fatigued, and it was past midnight, he concluded it was best to shut the door and go to bed. It was 10 the next morning before the merchant awoke, and as he was going to rise, he was astonished to see a good suit of clothes in the room of his own, which were quite spoiled. "Certainly," said he, "this palace belongs to some kind of fairy who has seen and pitied my distress." He looked through a window, but instead of snow saw the most delightful arbors, interwoven with the most beautiful flowers that were ever beheld. He then returned to the great hall, where he had supped the night before, and found some chocolate ready made on a little table. "Merci, good Madame Fairy," said he aloud, "for being so generous as to provide me a breakfast. I am extremely obliged to you for all your favors." The good man drank his chocolate, and then went to look for his horse. But passing through an arbor of roses, he remembered Beauty's request to him, and gathered a branch on which were several. Immediately he heard a great noise, and saw such a frightful beast coming towards him that he was ready to faint away.
"You are very ungrateful,"
said the beast to him in a terrible voice.
"I have saved your life by receiving you into my castle, and in return you steal my roses, which I value beyond anything in the universe. But you shall die for it. I give you but a quarter of an hour to prepare yourself, and say your prayers."
The merchant fell on his knees, and lifted up both his hands. "My lord," said he, "I beseech you to forgive me. Indeed, I had no intention to offend in gathering a rose for one of my daughters, who desired me to bring her one."
"My name is not my lord,"
replied the monster,
"but beast. I don't love compliments, not I. I like people to speak as they think, so do not imagine I am to be moved by any of your flattering speeches. But you say you have daughters. I will forgive you on condition that one of them come willingly and suffer for you. Let me have no words, but go about your business, and swear that if your daughter refuse to die in your stead, you will return within 3 months."
The merchant had no mind to sacrifice his daughters to the ugly monster, but he thought, in obtaining this respite, he should have the satisfaction of seeing them once more. So he promised upon oath he would return, and the beast told him he might set out when he pleased.
"But,"
added he,
"you shall not depart empty-handed. Go back to the room where you lay, and you will see a great empty chest. Fill it with whatever you like best, and I will send it to your home."
And then the beast withdrew. "Well," said the good man to himself, "if I must die, I shall have the comfort at least of leaving something to my poor children." He returned to the bedchamber, and finding a great quantity of broad pieces of gold, he filled the great chest the beast had mentioned, locked it, and afterwards took his horse out of the stable, leaving the palace with as much grief as he had entered it with joy. The horse of his own accord took one of the roads of the forest, and in a few hours the good man was at home. His children came round him, but instead of receiving their embraces with pleasure, he looked on them, and holding up the branch he had in his hands, he burst into tears. "Here, Beauty," said he, "take these roses, but little do you think how dear they are like to cost your unhappy father," and then related his fatal adventure. Immediately the 2 eldest set up lamentable outcries, and said all manner of ill-natured things to Beauty, who did not cry at all. "Do but see the pride of that little wretch," said they. "She would not ask for fine clothes as we did. But no, truly, Mademoiselle wanted to distinguish herself, so now she will be the death of our poor father. And yet she does not so much as shed a tear." "Why should I?" answered Beauty. "It would be very needless, for my father shall not suffer upon my account. Since the monster will accept one of his daughters, I will deliver myself up to all his fury, and I am very happy in thinking that my death will save my father's life, and be a proof of my tender love for him." "No, sister," said her 3 brothers, "that shall not be. We will go find the monster, and either kill him or perish in the attempt." "Do not imagine any such things, my sons," said the merchant. "The beast's power is so great that I have no hopes of your overcoming him. I am charmed with Beauty's kind and generous offer, but I cannot yield to it. I am old,
and have not long to live, so can only lose a few years, which I regret for your sakes alone, my dear children."
"Indeed, Papa," said Beauty, "you shall not go to the palace without me. You cannot hinder me from following you." It was to no purpose all they could say. Beauty still insisted on setting out for the fine palace, and her sisters were delighted at it, for her virtue and amiable qualities made them envious and jealous. The merchant was so afflicted at the thoughts of losing his daughter that he had quite forgot the chest full of gold. But at night, when he retired to rest, no sooner had he shut his chamber door than, to his great astonishment, he found it by his bedside. He was determined, however, not to tell his children that he was grown rich, because they would have wanted to return to town, and he was resolved not to leave the country. But he trusted Beauty with the secret, who informed him that 2 gentlemen came in his absence and courted her sisters. She begged her father to consent to their marriage and give them fortunes, for she was so good that she loved them and forgave heartily all their ill usage. These wicked creatures rubbed their eyes with an onion to force tears when they parted with their sister, but her brothers were really concerned. Beauty was the only one who did not shed tears at parting, because she would not increase their uneasiness. The horse took the direct road to the palace, and towards evening they perceived it illuminated as at first. The horse went off himself into the stable, and the good man and his daughter came into the great hall, where they found a table splendidly served up, and 2 place settings. The merchant had no heart to eat, but Beauty, endeavoring to appear cheerful, sat down to table and helped him. "Afterwards," thought she to herself, "the beast surely has a mind to fatten me before he eats me, since he provides such plentiful entertainment." When they had supped, they heard a great noise, and the merchant, all in tears, bid his poor child farewell, for he thought the beast was coming. Beauty was sadly terrified at his horrid form, but she took courage as well as she could, and the monster having asked her if she came willingly, "Yes," said she, trembling. The beast responded,
"You are very good, and I am gratefully obliged to you. Honest man, go your ways tomorrow morning, but never think of coming here again."
"Farewell, Beauty. Farewell, beast," answered he, and immediately the monster withdrew. "Oh, my daughter," said the merchant, embracing Beauty, "I am almost frightened to death. Believe me, you had better go back and let me stay here."
"No, Papa," said Beauty in a resolute tone. "You shall set out tomorrow morning and leave me to the care and protection of Providence." They went to bed and thought they should not close their eyes all night, but scarce were they laid down than they fell fast asleep, and Beauty dreamed. A fine lady came and said to her, "I am content, Beauty, with your goodwill. This good action of yours in giving up your own life to save your father's shall not go unrewarded." Beauty awoke and told her father her dream, and though it helped to comfort him a little, yet he could not help crying bitterly when he took leave of his dear child. As soon as he was gone, Beauty sat down in the great hall, and fell to crying likewise. But as she was mistress of a great deal of resolution, she gave herself into God's care, and resolved not to be uneasy the little time she had to live, for she firmly believed the beast would eat her up that night. However, she thought she might as well walk about until then, and view this fine castle, which she could not help admiring. It was a delightful, pleasant place, and she was extremely surprised at seeing a door, over which was written, "Beauty's apartment." She opened it hastily, and was quite dazzled with the magnificence that reigned throughout. But what chiefly took up her attention was a large library, a harpsichord, and several music books. "Well," said she to herself, "I see they will not let my time hang heavy upon my hands for want of amusement." Then she reflected, "Were I but to stay here a day, there would not have been all these preparations." This consideration inspired her with fresh courage, and opening the library, she took a book and read these words in letters of gold: Welcome, beauty, banish fear. You are queen and mistress here. Speak your wishes, speak your will. Swift obedience meets them still. Alas, said she with a sigh, there is nothing I desire so much as to see my poor father, and know what he is doing. She had no sooner said this, when casting her eyes on a great looking-glass, to her great amazement, she saw her own home, where her father arrived with a very dejected countenance. Her sisters went to meet him, and, notwithstanding their endeavors to appear sorrowful, their joy, felt for having got rid of their sister, was visible in every feature. A moment after, everything disappeared, along with Beauty's apprehensions at this proof of Beast's complacence. At noon she found dinner ready, and while at table was entertained with an excellent concert of music, though without seeing anybody. But that night, as she was going to sit down to supper, she heard the noise the Beast made, and could not help being sadly terrified.
Beauty,
said the monster,
will you give me leave to see you sup?
That is as you please, answered Beauty, trembling.
No,
replied the Beast.
You alone are mistress here. You need only bid me gone, if my presence is troublesome, and I will immediately withdraw. But tell me, do you not think me very ugly?
That is true, said Beauty, for I cannot tell a lie, but I believe you are very good-natured.
So I am,
said the monster.
But then, besides my ugliness, I have no sense. I know very well that I am a poor, silly, stupid creature.
'Tis no sign of folly to think so, replied Beauty, for never did fool know this, or had so humble a conceit of his own understanding.
Eat then, Beauty,
said the monster,
and endeavor to amuse yourself in your palace, for everything here is yours, and I should be very uneasy if you were not happy.
You are very obliging, answered Beauty. I own I am pleased with your kindness, and when I consider that, your deformity scarce appears.
Yes, yes,
said the Beast.
My heart is good, but still I am a monster.
Among mankind, said Beauty, there are many that deserve that name more than you, and I prefer you, just as you are, to those who, under a human form, hide a treacherous, corrupt, and ungrateful heart.
If I had sense enough,
replied the Beast,
I would make a fine compliment to thank you, but I am so dull that I can only say, I am greatly obliged to you.
Beauty ate a hearty supper, and had almost conquered her dread of the monster, but she had like to have fainted away when he said to her,
Beauty, will you be my wife?
It was some time before she dared answer, for she was afraid of making him angry if she refused. At last, however, she said, trembling, No, Beast. Immediately, the poor monster began to sigh and hiss so frightfully that the whole palace echoed. But Beauty soon recovered her fright, for the Beast, having said in a mournful voice,
Then farewell, Beauty,
left the room, and only turned back now and then to look at her as he went out. When Beauty was alone, she felt a great deal of compassion for the poor Beast. Alas, said she, 'tis thousand pities. Anything so good-natured should be so ugly. Beauty spent 3 months very contentedly in the palace. Every evening Beast paid her a visit, and talked to her during supper, very rationally, with plain good common sense, but never with what the world calls wit. And Beauty daily discovered some valuable qualifications in the monster, and seeing him often had so accustomed her to his deformity that, far from dreading the time of his visit, she would often look on her watch to see when it would be 9, for the Beast never missed coming at that hour. There was but one thing that gave Beauty any concern, which was that every night before she went to bed, the monster always asked her if she would be his wife. One day she said to him, "Beast, you make me very uneasy. I wish I could consent to marry you, but I am too sincere to make you believe that will ever happen. I shall always esteem you as a friend. Endeavor to be satisfied with this."
"I must,"
said the beast,
"for alas, I know too well my own misfortune, but then I love you with the tenderest affection. However, I ought to think myself happy that you will stay here. Promise me never to leave me."
Beauty blushed at these words. She had seen in her glass that her father had pined himself sick for the loss of her, and she longed to see him again. "I could," answered she, "indeed promise never to leave you entirely, but have so great a desire to see my father that I shall fret to death if you refuse me that satisfaction."
"I had rather die myself,"
said the monster,
"than give you the least uneasiness. I will send you to your father. You shall remain with him for your sake, and this poor beast will die with grief."
"No," said Beauty, weeping. "I love you too well to be the cause of your death. I give you my promise to return in 1 week. You have shown me that my sisters are married, and my brother's gone to the army. Only let me stay a week with my father, as he is alone."
"You shall be there tomorrow morning,"
said the beast.
"but remember your promise. You need only lay your ring on a table before you go to bed, when you have a mind to come back. Farewell, Beauty."
Beast sighed, as usual, bidding her good night, and Beauty went to bed very sad at seeing him so afflicted. When she awoke the next morning, she found herself at her father's, and having rung a little bell that was by her bedside, she saw the maid come, who, the moment she saw her, gave a loud shriek, at which the good man ran upstairs, and thought he should have died with joy to see his dear daughter again. He held her fast locked in his arms above a quarter of an hour. As soon as the first transports were over, Beauty began to think of rising, and was afraid she had no clothes to put on. But the maid told her that she had just found in the next room a large trunk full of gowns, covered with gold and diamonds. Beauty thanked good Beast for his kind care, and taking one of the plainest of them, she intended to make a present of the others to her sisters. She scarce had said so when the trunk disappeared. Her father told her that the Beast insisted on her keeping them herself, and immediately both gowns and trunk came back again. Beauty dressed herself, and in the meantime they sent to her sisters, who hastened thither with their husbands. They were both of them very unhappy. The eldest had married a gentleman, extremely handsome indeed, but so fond of his own person that he was full of nothing but his own dear self, and neglected his wife. The second had married a man of wit, but he only made use of it to plague and torment everybody, and his wife most of all. Beauty's sisters sickened with envy when they saw her dressed like a princess, and more beautiful than ever, nor could all her obliging, affectionate behavior stifle their jealousy, which was ready to burst when she told them how happy she was. They went down into the garden to vent in tears, and said one to the other, "In what way is this little creature better than us, that she should be so much happier?" "Sister," said the oldest, "a thought just strikes my mind. Let us endeavor to detain her above a week, and perhaps the silly monster will be so enraged at her for breaking her word that he will devour her." "Right, sister," answered the other. "Therefore we must show her as much kindness as possible." After they had taken this resolution, they went up, and behaved so affectionately to their sister that poor Beauty wept for joy. When the week was expired, they cried and tore their hair, and seemed so sorry to part with her that she promised to stay a week longer. In the meantime, Beauty could not help reflecting on herself, for the uneasiness she was likely to cause poor Beast, whom she sincerely loved, and really longed to see again. The 10th night she spent at her father's, she dreamed she was in the palace garden, and that she saw the beast extended on the grass plat, who seemed just expiring, and in a dying voice reproached her ingratitude. Beauty started out of her sleep, and burst into tears. "Am I not very wicked," said she, "to act so unkindly to beast, that has studied so much to please me in everything? Is it his fault if he is so ugly, and has so little sense? He is kind and good, and that is sufficient. Why did I refuse to marry him? I should be happier with the monster than my sisters are with their husbands. It is neither wit nor a fine person in a husband that makes a woman happy, but virtue, sweetness of temper, and complacence, and beast has all these valuable qualifications. It is true, I do not feel the tenderness of affection for him, but I find I have the highest gratitude, esteem, and friendship. I will not make him miserable. Were I to be so ungrateful, I should never forgive myself." Beauty, having said this, rose, put her ring on the table, and then laid down again. Scarce was she in bed before she fell asleep, and when she awoke the next morning, she was overjoyed to find herself in the beast's palace. She dressed in one of her richest gowns to please him, and waited for evening with the utmost impatience. At last the wished-for hour came. The clock struck 9, yet no beast appeared. Beauty then feared she had been the cause of his death. She ran crying and wringing her hands all about the palace, like one in despair. After having sought for him everywhere, she recollected her dream, and flew to the canal in the garden, where she dreamed she saw him. There she found poor beast stretched out, quite senseless, and, as she imagined, dead. She threw herself upon him without any dread, and finding his heart beat still, she fetched some water from the canal, and poured it on his head. Beast opened his eyes, and said to Beauty,
"You forgot your promise, and I was so afflicted for having lost you that I resolved to starve myself. But since I have the happiness of seeing you once more, I die satisfied."
"No, dear beast," said Beauty, "you must not die. Live to be my husband. From this moment I give you my hand, and swear to be none but yours. Alas, I thought I had only a friendship for you, but the grief I now feel convinces me that I cannot live without you." Beauty scarce had pronounced these words when she saw the palace sparkle with light, and fireworks, instruments of music. Everything seemed to give notice of some great event, but nothing could fix her attention. She turned to her dear beast, for whom she trembled with fear. But how great was her surprise! Beast was disappeared, and she saw at her feet one of the loveliest princes that any eye had ever beheld, who returned her thanks for having put an end to the charm under which he had so long resembled a beast. Though this prince was worthy of all her attention, she could not forbear asking where the beast was. "You see him at your feet," said the prince. "A wicked fairy had condemned me to remain under that shape until a beautiful virgin could consent to marry me. The fairy likewise enjoined me to conceal my secret. There was only you in the world generous enough to be won by the goodness of my temper, and in offering you my crown I cannot discharge the obligations I have to you." Beauty, agreeably surprised, gave the charming prince her hand to rise. They went together into the castle, and Beauty was overjoyed to find in the great hall her father and his whole family, whom the beautiful lady that appeared to her in her dream had conveyed thither. "Beauty," said this lady, "come and receive the reward of your judicious choice. You have preferred virtue before either wit or beauty, and deserve to find a person in whom all these qualifications are united. You are going to be a great queen. I hope the throne will not lessen your virtue or make you forget yourself." "As to you, ladies," said the fairy to Beauty's 2 sisters, "I know your hearts and all the malice they contain. Become 2 statues, but under this transformation still retain your reason. You shall stand before your sister's palace gate and be it your punishment to behold her happiness. And it will not be in your power to return to your former state until you own your faults. But I am very much afraid that you will always remain statues. Pride, anger, gluttony, and idleness are sometimes conquered, but the conversion of a malicious and envious mind is a kind of miracle." Immediately the fairy gave a stroke with her wand, and in a moment all that were in the hall were transported into the prince's dominions. His subjects received him with joy. He married Beauty and lived with her many years, and their happiness, as it was founded on virtue, was complete.